പോളണ്ടിൽ എന്ത് സംഭവിച്ചു?
പോളണ്ടിനെ പറ്റി നീ ഒരു അക്ഷരം മിണ്ടരുത്.
So in this series of episodes, we are going to be talking about nepotism, but I'm going to defer to Catherine's preferred term, which is power structures, the families that are involved in the Malayalam film industry. And you know, when we talk about families, we're not talking about the kind of extended family networks that are in Malayalam cinema, you know, the fact that Shobana and Vineeth and Parvati Jairam are all cousins, but and you know the Travancore sisters are some of their aunts, and we're talking about people whose dad or mom was in the industry and then they came into the industry.
And I think, was it you who shared a tweet the other day from somebody who said, if your parents in your Wikipedia bio are blue links, then you're not self-made?
Exactly.
It's like those are the people we're talking about. Although it's quite interesting when you start, I mean, one of the things that did fascinate me when I got into Indian cinema generally was how many sort of family groupings and extended family groupings there are. And it's quite funny to me because having lived in France for a number of years, the French industry is a little bit like that too. And they get very angsty sometimes about how their film is a family business. And it's not like that anywhere in the world. And I'm like, oh, yes, it is. And my explanation for it on one hand is sheer size of an industry. Like if you're a smaller industry, France, you know, thinks of film very, I mean, you know, you have Cannes, you have the Lumiere brothers. Film and cinema for France is like a core value industry cultural thing. So it is very important, and it gains importance because they export a lot. So now I'm rambling off on a thread already.
No, I think it is interesting to think about how industries view their nepotism or power structures or industry families. You know, with Bollywood, they're so out and out proud about it. And it's like, you know, like we can yell at Karan Johar as much as we want about Nepo kids, but like that's still like who he's gonna be promoting. And in Telugu, it's so wrapped up in political power. The multi-generational cinema families, like if you're building a career in film, you are in some ways expected to like use that to support your family's political aspirations as well. In Malayalam, it's such a small industry, so you know, we haven't had a lot of movie stars who became politicians, and we this is maybe the first generation where we're thinking of where people are coming back to are actually using their family's past power to build an image for the next generation. And part of the reason I don't think it has happened before is because it wasn't a lucrative industry. It was an industry where you go to like lose money if you are a producer. You know, it was like a typical starving artist setup. And that's why, to the person, all these guys seem to have engineering degrees because, you know, I've heard Mammootty say this about him and Sreenivasan insisting their kids get engineering degrees because they wanted them to have a job that wasn't in the arts. And I think it also kind of fits in the image we have of them as fathers, that like they're very like practical, like distant, not distant, but like they're kind of like hands-offish about their sons' careers, and that like they're like, oh, you're doing good in this field. Oh, okay, great. I didn't expect you to, but I'm glad you are.
Well, and one of the reasons I tend to harp on power structures is simply because of the fact that, particularly with Bollywood, people are constantly calling out nepotism. I mean, nepotism in and of itself is not a negative term, but it has become a very negative way to speak about having certain connections, not only family connections, you know, family connections, friend connections, school connections, other kinds of connections. And I mean, let's face it, in a lot of ways in life, we all get by on connections. And it's not inherently a bad thing until it becomes a problem. So that's why I kind of harp on power structures a little more as a term, because it tends to be a little more neutral. And then that gives us the opportunity to sort of look at both sides. Is it a positive thing? Is it when is it positive? When is it negative? Certainly, I think in sort of the worst cases in Bollywood, it's been a negative simply because there are some people who get a chance because of who their parents are. And they get many, 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 many chances to prove themselves, and they don't ever seem to be doing it. And I don't think we see very much of that in the Malayalam industry.
Yeah, at least we haven't seen too much of it yet. I will say one of the things that is very obvious to me as somebody who is from the caste-based communities that kind of dominate Malayalam cinema is that it's very easy to have connections in the industry if you are from certain castes. And at least for me, like, you know, my family is not a film family or anything like that, you know, but like we know uncles, we know relatives, we know people who we can get access to if we wanted to, who could hook us up to these networks. And I've heard Ranveer Singh say this, is like, if you are a middle class or upper middle class kid in Bandra, you know, like he was, you're gonna have connections to the industry. If you're from Bombay, like you're gonna have connections to the industry. But I think the difference is in Bombay, even, you know, if Ranveer Singh is related to Anil Kapoor through his wife, but you know, it's, if you're from Bombay and you're from an upper middle class family, there is no assurance that anybody will launch you in a movie the way that somebody's son will get launched, you know? And as opposed to, I think in Malayalam cinema, if you can keep hustling and you can keep inserting yourself into those social networks, there's a chance you can actually make it the way, you know, Niven did, or you know, Niven is the first person I can think of who's come out of like quote unquote nowhere without like a connection in this generation. But you know, when we think, and Tovina Thomas, but Tovino and Niven are also like distant cousins. I think they're like second or third cousins. So you know, you end up, in some ways, most of these guys have some sort of connection, but you know, certainly Tovino and Niven came out of nowhere compared to Fahad or Prithviraj or Dulquer. And now Roshan Matthew is like an upcoming actor that a lot of people are saying, you know, he's coming out of quote unquote like nowhere too. And I think Malayalam cinema can be proud of like still picking out these talents that don't have parental connections.
Well, and one of the articles I think I shared in our notes was about this concept that Malayalam cinema was more democratic in that sense, in that there are more opportunities for people to, you know, come out of nowhere than there are in other industries.
And the thing is, you know, like most people who can afford to like wait and you know, come you know, struggle for a bit, like both I think Tovino and Niven came from fairly well-off families. At least Tovino's family is definitely well-off, and I think Niven's parents worked abroad for many years. So you know, you need some sort of amount of family wealth to rely on. You know, if you're from a lower class, working class background, you don't have the resources to just keep struggling. You probably have other, you know, lower Maslow's hierarchy of needs things that you're working towards. So that's something, you know, that is part of the power structure. You're still getting kids from pretty well-off families who can afford that kind of support from their families. I know I heard it in, even for AD jobs, in assistant director jobs in Mumbai, I've heard productions say, so do you have any family support before they took on an AD? Because this is the time to tap into it, because we're not going to pay you enough for you to support yourself.
So those are some fundamental kind of differences already. I mean, some of the same things happening in the Malayalam industry as in other industries. Some differences. But the other thing that strikes me as an outsider is, again, I mentioned it earlier, in Bollywood, some of these star kids seem to get endless numbers of chances. And I think we don't see that necessarily in the Malayalam industry.
And I will say, especially when some of this first series of star kids slash talent were coming up, they were coming up in a time in which like the culture and the industry was very against kids from those families. Like they really didn't want them in there because they were like, who are these, especially because these guys started when they were teens. They weren't taken seriously at all as performers, as talents. And they really had to prove themselves to the industry and society, compared to maybe people who came out later, like Dulquer, who was beloved instantly, and we haven't had too many instances of like star kids who debut and like they're liked instantly by the audience.
Well, and let's organize what we're going to be talking about today, which is essentially, as you mentioned, this pre-new generation. So in particular, Prithviraj, Kunchacko Boban, and Vineeth Sreenivasan. And when I was going through some of their early, I'm at a real disadvantage here because I came into Malayalam cinema around 2010 when a lot of things were shifting. At the time when I could get access to DVDs with subtitles, it was mostly the late 90s to mid 2000s period, which everybody, went threw their hands up in horror, like, do not watch any of these films. But here you have three guys debuting in this very period and with some resistance to having star kids. Is it just star kids in general or these three particular star kids?
I think, there's Malayalis have this attitude of Avane Jadayana. And Jada is like this is this word that means arrogance, unwarranted arrogance, pride, and like standoffishness, like coldness. And I think Jada is like the first thing that like people used to talk about Prithviraj with. Like he thinks he's better than us. He thinks he's not like a local, like he speaks English, and he's always bragging about the fact that he speaks English. And so with Prithviraj, like you got like directors trying to shoehorn him into like a certain kind of mold that was already set, and him just like blowing that wide open and saying that like these are not the movies I want to be making. And he really like pushed the boundaries of what Malayalam hero could be in the time that he was making it to that superstar status.
Yeah, and I remember actually fairly early on thinking, why is everybody dumping all over this guy? There was a constant hammering of negativity about Prithviraj. And I was like, but he's working and he's doing solid work. And he has, about the time he was involved with his production company doing Urmi, he was doing interviews saying, so what is this, about 2010, 2011? He was doing interviews saying, Malayalam cinema is terrific. We need to get this on a platform, a wider platform, not even within India, outside of India. Like, he was a guy saying this stuff already, and people were on the one hand saying, well, yes, he's right, but it's Prithviraj, so we're just going to dump on this message. But it was quite interesting to me that years before that explosion of people discovering, outside of Kerala, discovering Malayalam cinema, he was already saying, we're worth this, and we just have to figure out how to market it.
And the part of it is like the culture, but the negativity, there's we have some evidence that it was coming from within the industry, or from other players in the industry, that there were rumors of a certain someone we don't talk about. He was paying people to like troll Prithviraj online, and as well as boo at his movies in the theaters. This guy, I don't want to talk about this guy, but like there was like so many mafia aspects to the way he was running things that there's, and we can see why, in the 2000s when that person was really like a big deal and make some of the biggest hit movies, he would be threatened by someone who was so much younger, more good looking, taller, more talented, more edgy in his outlook on the world. You could totally understand why someone like that would be threatened by him.
Yeah.
That person is a representation of a certain Malayali mindset, which is extremely rooted in this inferiority complex and not wanting people who might think a little differently.
So since we're talking about Prithviraj, let's start by talking about Prithviraj and who he is and where he comes from.
Yes. He comes from a family of artists. His mom is Mallika Sukumaran, who is still a working actress. I think she mostly does serials now, but she was married to his dad, who is Sukumaran, who is like the big star of the pre Mohanlal Mammootty era. It was Sukumaran and MG Soman were like the pre Mohanlal and Mammootty era big stars, and both his parents had a theatrical background as well. His mom was married to Jagdish Sreemar before she was married to Sukumaran. Yep. Which is always interesting when you would see them in movies together, Prithviraj or Indrajit with their mom's first husband. And so Sukumaran died in the 90s, and his wife, he left his widowed wife and 2 young children, and so his mom had to, I think, made most her way and paid for her kids' education and everything through serial work, because she lost this big income earner.
Yeah, because she had retired from films not long after Indrajit was born. So, she had 2 small kids.
And it's a very typical like film story where like they the guy who's the big deal dies, and then the single mom is left to widowed mom is left to take care of 2 kids. And you can always see the Prithviraj is like sincerely like very admiring of the way his mom raised them. Like, she didn't let the standard of their childhoods drop because she wasn't able to keep up with the income that her husband was earning. And so, yeah, he went to some really good schools in Kerala, ergo the English, and he was sent abroad, like a lot of the star kids that we'll see, to do his undergraduate degree. He was living in Australia when he was cast for Nandanam by Ranjit.
Which is actually the first film I saw him in. I was going through and making, because we made a list of sort of the first 2 or 3 films for each of the actors we're going to talk about today. And I was trying to see, we're going to talk about Kunchacko Boban and Vineeth Sreenivasan, and I had seen both of them for the first time in Traffic. So again, like, my experience is I have no idea with these actors, because I even with Nandanam, I was not watching it at the time it came out. I was watching it several years after it came out. So my experience is very different from yours or from someone, living in Kerala at that time, about an actual, it was quite fascinating for me to watch when Dulquer launched, because I was seeing that in real time and seeing it play out. So I have no clue how this plays out for each of these 3 we're going to be talking about today. But the first Prithviraj film I saw was Nandanam. And it was because, the first film I ever saw was Katherine, and the DVD guy that I went to buy from, suddenly looked at my little stack of DVDs, because I had no clue. I was just picking out stuff, and looked behind on the shelf, picked out a DVD, put this out, said, "Have you seen this?" I said, "No." He said, "You have to see this. I'm giving it to you."
And this was 2008, 2009, something like that?
Yeah. And it was actually the first film he shot, but it was released after Stop Violence. So that must have been really interesting too. And the thing that struck me about Nandanam is it's not Prithviraj's film.
No, and I remember when that movie came out, everybody was talking about Navya Nair. Nobody was talking. They were, what you often see in like Malayalam movies where it's a female lead and there's like some random new actor is like, they pour all the affection and like adoration on the female star, and the male star really like is like, that's some kid they hired and now they're like, now he's gonna go like do a few like B grade films, and he's gonna be done. That was like the attitude, and yes, because the film kind of like makes like puts a point on it that like this is Sukumaran's son, like because by showing his picture as the father in the movie. Yes, we know that information, but unlike Bollywood, maybe there wasn't a lot of respect for that fact among the Malayali audience. So everything was about Navya Nair. So we had no idea like Prithviraj was even going to have a career at that point.
Yeah, and I think I adore that film, quite honestly, and I adore her in it. And I thought, okay, he's likable. I did think at points that she elevated his performance, which, I mean, is totally fair, because if that's his first shoot, that may actually be the case. I think he did well not to be swamped and disappear under everything that was happening around him. I do think that his character Manu, I mean, they even say he's sensitive in the film, and he's sensitive and he's flirty, and there, I mean, that it's really questionable what he's up to in the film, and they deal with it because she's a servant. But I thought, okay, this is nice. He's likable. And then I watched Stop Violence.
So you've seen Stop Violence?
I've seen it a few times, and I don't think it's a great film, but I wish I could find subtitles for it, because I'm coming again at another huge disadvantage. Like, I'm really interested in people's first films, or their the beginnings of their careers, and Stop Violence is, I don't even know where to begin.
First, so it was called Violence when it was made. They didn't care. They were like going for it. And then there was a bunch of controversy, and they had to change the Stop Violence.
But it's an incredibly negative role. And again, you're looking at someone, I would have expected the Nandanam kind of role from someone starting out wanting to establish a career, and wanting to sort of set a tone for his career. But then you've got Stop Violence, and he's incredibly negative. He wears a chain with 666. His name is Satan. And the female lead is Angelina, or they keep calling her Angel in the film. So, there's this devil, angel, evil, not evil stuff going on, and his character is really violent and rapey. The whole film is really rapey, although you don't see it. I was quite stunned by the fact, rewatching it again this week, that you don't actually see the violence or the rape take place. You see sort of what precedes it and what follows it, but that was enough to be really creepy and horrifying.
And you have to remember, he was like 19 when these movies were coming out. So it was just, I think people were shocked that like someone so young was going for such a dark role, because there was a set career he could have had that Kunchacko Boban had like built up, and he could have gone that route. And so from there onwards, I think Prithviraj established this image.
Yeah, there is something even in these two films, none of them where he's not the point, and Stop Violence, where the character is so negative, it's unbelievable. There is something still kind of compelling about him on screen. Like because I watch a lot of first films, I kind of get a sense. I try to be nice when I see someone that I go, yeah, no, you're not going to have a career. And I would like to be proved wrong, but I'm rarely proved wrong. Like with Malavari Arts Club, I looked at that, and I looked at the way the camera just ate Niven Pauly up. And I remember at the time saying to people, watch this kid. Look out for this kid. Watch this. And people were going, Niven who? Can you imagine that now? Niven who? But, to bring it back to Prithviraj, I see the same kind of thing. I see the same, and with each film, it progresses a little more. The two films, Stop Violence in particular, is sort of, at one point they show, there are a bunch of Gundas watching Ram Gopal Varma's Satya on the TV screen, and I kind of went, yeah, that's what they're trying to do here. They're trying to give us this sort of artsy look, dark, this life, and framing it with, the filmmaker.
The A.K. Sajan, who you're talking about, the director of Stop Violence?
No. The director who's in Stop Violence, A.K.
Lohita Das, yeah.
I actually thought that was, I mean, again, I'm coming at it with subtitles, but that was sort of an interesting framing device that he's this director in, the film, researching a film, and at the end we see the poster being put up for his film based on this character. I mean, it's kind of, clever. It's not brilliant, but you can see, I could see what this film was kind of aiming for, and I could see why someone like Prithviraj might say, okay, I'll do this role.
I remember him really having to defend his choice to do that, to do stop violence, because he was trying to say, just like the Satya mention, like the Satya reference, it's like he was trying to defend the vision. And that was a constant theme in Prithviraj's career, is like him doing a movie or making a statement and having to defend his choices to a very antagonistic industry, media, society. And I think he really, it's not in his personality to take the path of least resistance. And I think the fact that he chose this movie so early in his career kind of shows that. I really do like Prithviraj as a person in the industry. I don't find him very captivating on screen. I don't find him very interesting on screen, especially when he does romantic scenes. I find it very cringy. Like, I want to pull away. Like, he's not very warm on screen. So, and which is why he does all these cop roles, because when he does brooding cop roles, it's like falls into his natural range. Yep. Compared to someone like his brother, who is a much more charismatic, warm presence on screen, and he can do a lot more roles, and we don't cringe when he does romance.
Well, and I've always said that I prefer Indrajit over Prithviraj, and I think it's probably that's part of the reason, is I do find him. Prithviraj I can find okay at times, and I guess it probably is the cop roles more than anything. Again, I said I liked him in Nandanam, but he wasn't the point. And maybe if he was the point, although there is that scene where he's with Navya Nair's character, and he's washing the car, and the license plate of the car is 123, and he's like 123, and it's code for I love you or something. And it was like, oh, dude. No.
I always think, yes, he's even 21 in that movie. Like his character, he's like really young, and it's supposed to be really corny, which is the only reason I excuse those things in that movie.
Well, and it's quite interesting too that I look at his age, and I have this vision of him in my head as always 30.
I think he always went for, like, even when he was like 20, he was playing dad to little kids. And yeah, I agree. He's always 30.
Then I think, well, how is he not like 45 now? But I feel that way about a lot of people who have these careers, and I don't realize until I really think about it how young they started. I know we're not going to talk so much about other than the acting, but I did find his choices for a directorial debut interesting. And I think it comes out of that perspective that I would have expected something a little more outside the box than a straight up massy hero film starring Mohanlal. But on the other hand, if this is someone who gets a lot of flack for everything he does, one of the ways to defect flack on a directorial venture is to go for something that might be more appealing to people who might throw, that flack at you.
I will also say in the last 5 to 6 years, Prithviraj has become disappointingly unadventurous compared to his early career. And maybe just, as you get older, you kind of want to he's settled into stardom. He's become like the star that he's always like haranguing Mammootty and Mohanlal for becoming. Like, he kind of wants to do the same kind of films because he probably has other priorities, and even his productions have, in my opinion, not been as exciting as August Cinemas used to be.
Well, and I mean, he's no longer
he's not.
August Cinemas. He left.
I think he produces on his own though.
But that's probably a good place to start segueing maybe into Kunchacko Boban. Again, has the blue the blue links in his family, although a little more distant.
Yes, his grandfather was a producer back in the days. He's Navodaya Appachan. Navodaya Studios was a big deal. He made Mannil Virinja Pookal, and he made the 3D movie that my mom talks about from 1984, My Dear Kuttichatan. So it's a big studio that made a lot of interesting movies. It's a very interesting studio, and I don't think most people, when Kunchacko Boban debuted, really kind of knew. I mean, I think people kind of knew his grandfather, but I don't think it was like as relevant as, say, Dulkar or Fahad debuting and like people knowing who his actual father is compared to a grandfather. Kunchacko Boban was like a sensation when he debuted with Vineeth Sreenivasan. I was very little, but I had a teenage cousin, and I was home in Kerala for the summer, and we watched it as a family. And then my cousin would just take the cassette, and like she and I would just like watch it again and again and again. And one time my uncle came and was like, what the hell are these girls doing? What is going on with this guy that like you girls are so obsessed?
Well, and I think a little bit of that, for those of us who are not from that period, we can get a little bit of taste of it with Om Shanti Oshana, where Pooja Matthew becomes obsessed with Kunchacko Boban to the point that that's why she wants a motorcycle. That's why she rides a motorcycle, because he rides one in the first film. And I'm going to be quite honest, was it Anyati Praval? I love this film. I shouldn't, because I am the least romantic person ever. But I think if I were 20 and at that time and watching that film, I think I would have been like you. I would have watched this film over and over and over and over. And I did have people on Twitter tell me that his pairing with Shalini, that they loved those two together, and they adored him. And like this is the first time I've noticed someone who has that people talk about in that sort of very romantic, starry kind of way.
Absolutely. And, all these guys, I went through their early films as we discussed, and I was like, Kunchacko Boban is the only person whose all his early films I've seen. I've pretty much till 2002, 2003, I think I've seen all of his films, because I remember in school, I was still in Indian school when a lot of these movies were coming out. It was like a big discussion. Do we like Kunchacko Boban and Shalini, or do we like Kunchacko Boban and Jomo better as a pair? And it, like, he was such a big deal. It's hard to describe. Like, yes, you can compare him to Shah Rukh Khan in that way. I mean, but he was just so young and like so in a lot of ways felt so accessible to us compared to like Mohanlal or Mammootty or like larger than life stars. And all his movies were like these small romantic comedies about like a young couple trying to make it, whether it was with Shalini or with Jomal. And then, the big deal that was Niram came out, and it was like, it was so good. Like, I remember watching in theater and being like, this is amazing.
Well, and I have to admit, when I get feeling kind of low, I pull out a Kunchacko Boban film, because I just know it's not going to be a big film. But it's just going to hit some little sweet spot, and I'm going to smile, and it's going to make me feel better. I also think he's because dancing is not a forte of many leads in Malayalam cinema, but he's one of the rare cases where he can actually, he's not like Vijay and Tamil, or, you're not going to get that level of song and dance, but he's pretty respectable. Particularly when I've gone back and watched some of Vineeth Sreenivasan, God bless him, and some of the things they had him doing in his early films, and it's like, no. But yeah, so for me, like, Kunchacko Boban is just like a nice little sweet spot, and yet he took a break.
Yes, and I think that because the pressure of being so accessible to people, of being like the nice boy, being the, I think all young actors suffer from this, like their phones are getting blown up constantly by girls sending texts and calls. But I think he really was constantly being barraged by the fans, and he was just I think he was just feeling forced to like into that one kind of role that we love him in.
And there has been a bit of a shift since taking that break. There has been a bit of a shift in his career. There are still not necessarily full-on romantic comedies, but there's still certainly comedies. There are a few buddy comedies with Biju Menon. I love them together. But then we come sort of to the last year, and he has revived his grandfather's studio to do his own production.
And we have to talk about when the break was. It was kind of between 2005 and 2010. So like he came back right with Traffic, and he came back right into the perfect time in Malayalam cinema. I mean, he's a smart man. He clearly knew that 2012 was not a great year for Malayalam cinema, and it wasn't doing much for him as an actor.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I mean, the first time I saw him was in Traffic, and I think Traffic was a good film for me because it was such a big cast, and I was in my learning period. Not that I ever have to stop learning, but it was like suddenly I had a whole new group of actors I needed to learn about beyond Mohanlal and Mammootty, who were like the first things that everybody threw at me. And I think that was a good place because I did start, I mean, it was the first time I saw Vineeth Sreenivasan, and I started looking at his films. First time I saw Kunchacko Boban, and I think films like that happen more often in the Malayalam industry, and I think they are great because they give you a chance to start exploring other people and seeing, I mean, he was the doctor who thought he'd killed his wife. And that's one of the reasons he was part of this drive to deliver the heart for the transplant. So again, it's more of a gray role. So you have this character who we like him and yet we don't like him, and we're sort of relieved when he gets some kind of redemption in the end. It was a much different from everything else he'd done.
Yeah, and once again, just like when Prithviraj chose to do stop violence early in his career, it kind of made an emphatic point that Kunchacko Boban was coming back to be a little something different than what he had been. He wasn't. I know he doesn't love the chocolate boy image. Typically, he's a man at that point who was in his 30s. He wasn't going to love that. But yeah, it was a gray role, and we could see that he wanted to be expand his range, and he certainly expanded his range in new gen movies, but still holding on to that core of being immensely likable and somebody who really brightens the screen when he's on.
Well, and he took the role when Manju Warrior came back in How Old Are You, which was a very negative role, and it almost surprised me that he decided to do it. But again, as you're saying, if he wants to shake off the young romantic hero, keep his sort of nice guy core, then you've got to start taking some of these chances.
And I think, with that movie coming out, I think everybody associated with that movie who was working in that movie was threatened by the guy we don't talk about, and their careers were placed at risk. And the fact that he went ahead and did it to support Manju Warrier, to support Roshan Andrews. I think it shows something that, I remember Rima Kalingal saying something that Kunchacko Boban is a Tarawadi, which means that, it means, he comes from a good family, but also that, he has good values, that, he's got a strong moral center, and that, he's a gentleman, all of those things. And you don't often hear actresses saying using that word, because it's something you say to somebody younger than you. It's such a high level of compliment you could only give to somebody younger than you, because you think you're better than them to give that compliment. So that is very much what my image of him is, that like he's a complete gentleman and that he puts himself out there in a very, very invisible ways, but he does it.
Yeah, and I tend to be someone who really doesn't get involved in celebrity gossip, in celebrity private life. It's like that's their life, they don't. But I was sort of thrilled when he and his wife had their baby, and it just felt like they weren't too out there with it, but you could just feel how happy they were after all the time that, I mean, you know, and it's none of our business.
Well, I do know. Well, you know, you through family grapevine, you and like community gossip, you do. They've been trying for a baby for a very long time, and yeah, it's so exciting that they had a baby, and we're so happy for them.
Yeah. And I think that is because I just find him so likable. Like I have this list of people I would love to sit down and have tea with, and he's one of them. And I would like to think that he would not be very different from the impression he leaves, because I know that's not always the case.
Sure, yeah. And I think part of why he kind of felt the pressure of the industry a lot is because he's probably more down to earth as a person than, you know, a lot of the larger than life figures we have in the industry.
So shall we move on to our third subject?
Yes, the very interesting Vineeth Sreenivasan. I mean, the first thing we have to say is he is the son of Sreenivasan, and Sreenivasan is the reason you are into Malayalam cinema.
Yeah, and I think this is the first of the three that has like the strongest family connection present in the industry, because I just, as you say, I discovered fairly early on that, you know, Sreenivasan was someone I needed to know about. I mean, he wrote the first film I ever watched. He wrote films that are incredible classics in Malayalam cinema. I sometimes go back and forth on him as an actor, except sometimes I think, well, he's just like, this is the same role all the time. And then I see him do something like one of the films we were sort of looking at for today, Mallika and Sukumaran. And you just see how effortless he can be on screen. So it must have been interesting for Vineeth to be entering the industry with a father that has that much weight in his career.
You know, his exposure to arts actually came from competing in opera, like the classic, the Muslim folks music. Not Muslim music. It's Mapla, it's specifically, which is Kerala Muslims who speak Malayalam, and that's how I was exposed to him, with the beautiful Kasavinde from first movie that he was in, which, well, he wasn't in it, but so Kasavinde Tattamita was like the song from Kilichundam Mambaram, and I think most people could like identify that, oh, that's Sreenivasan's son. Like, we would see the credit and we'd be like, that's Vineeth Sreenivasan is Sreenivasan's son. And we thought, you know, he was going to be like a good singer and like he was going to have a good career, because that's where he had been doing in secondary school and things like that, doing singing competitions.
Yeah, and I mean, the first 6 years of his career is as a playback singer. And people pointed out, because when I was sort of looking at Marakar, and the song release from Marakar, and my first reaction was, this feels like this, not understanding the lyrics. I'm assuming it's a love song because you have two young people cavorting, but it sort of felt a mismatch between the style of the music and the grandeur of the setting. And a lot of people said to me, no, this is Mapila, and this is actually very appropriate to this setting. And so now I feel like somebody has opened another box for me that I have to start exploring, and I really feel out of my depth considering it. But then they pointed out too that, I mean, it's Vineeth Sreenivasan singing it, and he won a prize for this, and that's sort of the start of his career. So in a way, I mean, that's kind of a good way to start your career if your father is this weight in the industry as a writer and an actor.
Yeah, it's really fun. It was really, I think, good for him as a way into the industry, that he's such a good singer, and his dad is not at all known for singing. You know, just when he in Karale Karalinda Karale from Udayanana Taram, where he playback sang for his dad, it was so fun for people. Like his voice coming out of his dad's mouth while his dad is playing this clownish star was really, really fun for people. And so there was a lot of inbuilt affection for Vineeth before he ever made his on-screen debut, before he became a director. His voice was I think a source of joy for the audience.
And I mean, for people who don't know him, he does very much resemble his father.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it must have been, I mean, that's going to limit the kind of roles he would have had anyway, because he's not a big hero type. And his first film, Cycle, 2008, he's a little bit older than Kunchacko Boban and Prithviraj, because he's about 24 when he does this film, but again, already established as a singer. It was quite funny looking at his Wikipedia bio to start doing some research, because playback singer is what gets listed for him. Like when it comes up, with the little abbreviated bit, Vineeth playback singer. And, it's been interesting to see that he's really so much more than this. But Cycle, screenplay by James Albert, who also wrote Classmates. Actually, Classmates was probably the first place I actually saw Prithviraj. So again, another one of these ensemble casts that had me leaping off in other directions. But Cycle is about these two friends, Roy and Sanju, strugglers. But it's actually a film that's got kind of a dark side, because they decide to steal money from the finance company that Roy, played by Vineeth Sreenivasan, work at. So there's this whole little moral dilemma going on that gets resolved by the end of the film, but not really a comedy, a darker little film. Again, something that seemed a bit different from what I might have expected, even though he's not going to be, straight up hero role, or not a romantic hero role.
Yeah, I think I found it a little surprising that he was cast in a lead role. Yes, he's got that beautiful voice, but he's no more handsome than his dad. And, but he doesn't have the inherent, talent for comedy that his dad has, the physical, looseness. He holds himself a little tighter than his dad does. And I think that might be the reason why he never got any of those excellent sidekick roles that Aju Varghese does in all his movies. So it did surprise me that he got the hero role and the lead role. And I think typically people perceived him at that time as, okay, he'll do a couple of these movies here and there, and but his primary career will be a playback singer. And then he makes Navodaya Arts Club, which we all liked, and it was like, okay, this is nice, and he has some talent here, which makes sense because of who his father is. And then he comes out with Tatatan Marayate, and obviously it's, once again, the entire state is afire with Nivin Bali and Vineeth Sreenivasan and Aju Varghese, and it was a huge sensation.
Yeah, and that I remember. And it was, and particularly too because his second film, Mallika and Sukumaran, which was with his father playing his father, that was the point. I mean, Sreenivasan actually won an acting award for Best Supporting Actor for that role, and that was where I was really struck with what you said, that Vineeth, it tends to be a little stiffer. And I was sort of putting it down to, well, it's his second film. But then when you see, how effortless his father is, it was like, oh, but he took a break after that. And then he didn't come back in acting, he came back directing and writing with Navodaya Arts Club. So I'm wondering, did he realize that maybe, I think he's a decent actor. I think he's fine when he's sort of in a supporting role. And he has such a likable presence that it's like in Traffic, that was the thing that really sold you, because his character dies really early in the film. And he made such an impact as this very likable young guy starting his first day at work who never makes it there. And then he's on life support while they decide what they're going to do for a long stretch of this film. You needed somebody with that immense likability, so you would make an immediate connection with him and really feel for the family, really feel for this life cut short. I thought that was a really, again, another interesting choice.
I think the role I liked him in most, or found him most suited for, was Chapa Kurisha, was where he was like this very beaten down character, and his like tense body language that we were talking about, his that really suited his character. And maybe a more flexible actor like his father could do, for certainly do that role, and he could do comedy roles as well. But his there was something that I found that connected to me in his very, I'm repressed and I'm pushed into this role and I want to get out of it, and I'm going to manipulate somebody who has more power than me to get what I want out of this situation. That is probably my favorite role of his as an actor.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think I would even go so far to say as he actually has more of an impact than Fahad Fazil in that film. And to be able to say that is something. I mean, Fahad Fazil was playing sort of this entitled, wealthy asshole jerk, which he could do with his eyes closed. And fortunately, he doesn't limit himself to that. Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that role as that grocery clerk who finally gets a taste of being able to wield some power after all this oppression. That's a really good role.
And so if he comes back and does more roles like that, I'm okay with it. But, obviously his talent is as a director, as a singer, and it's crazy to go from Tatatin Marietta to then go to Tira. It was so different for him as a director, and I think people were genuinely pleased at the fact that he just didn't go do another romantic comedy or another youth film. Like, his next film could have been the film he did. What was his next film could have very easily been Oriwara and Selfie, which kind of plays on the same emotions and their tropes as Tatatin Marietta, but he went and did Tira, and he brought back Shobana.
And the only time Shobana has ever dubbed for herself, and he asked her to do it, and she did it for him. I believe she resisted, but she did it. Now, we have to also say that film also introduced another member of his family to the industry, his brother Jan. And it's quite funny because, again, there's a role where that's kind of an easy entry because the focus is all on Shobana. So, you could be a tree standing next to her and you'd look good by comparison. I don't remember a lot about him in that film. My impression, I hate to say this, is I don't think he's going to have the kind of career. You're smiling. And I'm trying to be generous. I find him likable enough when he's put into one of these small sidekick roles, and he's okay. But he's also trying to get into directing. He did Love Action Drama starring Niven Pauly. I don't think he has what it takes.
With Tira, the person obviously Shobana was taking up all my attention, but then the person who was I was kind of more interested in Dhyan was Deepak Parambol, who plays the trafficker, I think, and Vineeth Sreenivasan's cast are just littered with these immensely talented actors doing small roles, and he has such a talent for finding these guys. People, Ajuargis, Sharafuddin didn't debut with his films, I don't think, but Sharafuddin is associated with that group of Niven's friends.
See, and this is why I get talking about nepotism being more, nepotism is just, using connections. But that's why I try to emphasize that there's more going on here, because you have, the whole Maharaja College group, you have, these cores of friends, like Dulquer has his core of friends that he started with, that he continues to work with and give opportunities to when he can. Same with Vineeth Sreenivasan. There's these little groups that makes sense. If you have a group of people you're comfortable working with and that you do good work with, it only makes sense to keep pulling them together to do things, as long as you can do things that are, different, fresh, interesting, likable.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there is some sort of connection between Vineeth Sreenivasan and Alphonse Putran, who are the two cores of Niven Pauly's career. The two pillars, and I don't think they themselves have any connection, but like they share a lot of actors between them and talent between them.
Well, and if Niven is their point of connection, then there are probably people around Niven that will want to work with Niven. That means that they, get involved with both directors.
That makes sense.
So that's one of the things I wanted to emphasize as we talk about, in the next 2-3 episodes about some of these star kids, is that it's not always a negative to have connections. And I really do think that if you do, particularly in the millennium industry, if you do not have the talent, you will eventually not get the work. Or the work you get will not be, because when we started doing some talking about this, I started going and looking, and that was the moment I discovered that Prem Nazir's son is working in the industry.
I think I've heard this, but I don't remember or know who he is.
Shanavas. And I went, okay, does he have any kind of career? He does. And I went and found a picture of him and went, oh God, yes, I've seen him. I've seen him in a bazillion films. But he's always in these really smaller supporting roles. So you might have a career, and that's where your career would be. Shami Tilakan. I mean, how many policemen has he played?
Right.
So you may not even get a shot at a starring role. You may get a shot, and if you're not good enough, but you may be good enough to do supporting roles, and that's where you'll end up. And it strikes me that in the Malayalam industry that's more the case, that the people without the talent to take on the bigger jobs get shuffled and filtered down or get moved right out of the industry.
Yeah, and for me at least, Vineeth's first few films made me feel like he could be one of those side role actors, like Shami Tilakan, like a beloved face, but not somebody who does leading roles, and that would have been fine. And I mean, connections helped, but it was, if he hadn't made this phenomena that was Tata Din Malayato, he wouldn't have the kind of career he currently does, and especially his eye for choosing actors is undefeated.
Well, and he's now getting into producing as well. Particularly June.
Yes, which was a great film, in my opinion. I think he did produce June.
Helen. No, he produced Helen. I've got a girl's name wrong. Helen, which he got into producing and produced Helen, which was a terrific film. But his next directorial is Pranav Mohanlal and Kalyani Priyadarshan.
Oh, God. Hridayam. So we're going to have a whole thing to talk about Pranav Mohanlal in another episode. I have my personal, tilting at windmills about him.
Well, yeah, we've both mentioned it before. But I did see somebody say it would be really interesting to see what Vineeth Sreenivasan could do with him.
True. I mean, he is a much more interesting director than any of the others. I mean, not to put down Jitu Joseph, but clearly he was just doing a favor to Mohanlal.
But yeah, I have a lot of things to say too, but I'll save that for when we talk about the
Sounds good.
We both have a lot to say about Pranav. Poor Pranav.
They've been trying to make him happen for a decade. Next time we shall be discussing some of the more obvious, I think, examples of nepotism in the industry, which is Dulquer Salman, Pranav Mohanlal, sons of Mammootty and Mohanlal respectively, and Fahad Fazil, the son of director Fazil, who actually introduced Kunchacko Boban to the industry. Thanks for listening to the Poland in Empathy podcast.
If you like what you're hearing, remember to come back for our next episode and share our podcast with your friends.
If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at polandinempathy@gmail.com or reach out to us on our Twitter feed @polandinempathy. See you next time.